Good. So, and you'll also notice there's two cameras, so you can see me, and then you can also see like my legs, but also the piano keyboard, so that you can see what I'm working on. So, let's go through it. So the first thing I'm going to talk about, which I think is really important and something we don't always have time to talk about in lessons because there's so much music we're trying to get to, is taking good care of yourself. Because in my opinion, after playing music for something like 25 years, a long time, music is athletic and we are athletes. So the first thing I like to do is just stretch, and I'll walk you through some good ones that I think are useful. So the first thing is stretching arms overhead, so you can do this, and stretching sideways like so. And I'm imagining all of you doing that right now. This is opening up your rib cage and kind of stretching out your shoulders and your arms, which are all very important. And then the second one is lacing your fingers together and doing this. Bonus points if your knuckles crack, and then overhead, side to side as well. That feel really good. Okay, and then rotating your wrists. Having flexible wrists is actually really important to piano playing, so we do that as well. Okay, and then you can give them a little shake if you want. Good, and I like to warm my hands up because playing piano with cold fingers is really, really hard, so I often do a little bit of this as well. Which leads us to massage, which I find is really nice part of piano. So many of you may already know this, but we have 1 bone in our upper arm, 2 in our forearm, and then we have 27 in our hands, which is kind of extraordinary what our hands can do. So I like to warm up my hands a little bit. So if you put your thumb in the middle of your hand and just give a nice little push and pull right across your palm, you're kind of opening up your muscles and warming up your hand. Okay? And I would do that with both. It feels really good. Now what you can also do, our forearms are a really important part. So you can do the same thing, thumb in your forearm, and just kind of roll that muscle around and move your way up. This is like stretching before you go for a run, or before you do soccer practice, or before you do something like that. I think a lot of us would probably make sure we always do that. So when I'm playing, I tend to like to do this. And I notice if I don't do it, I don't feel quite as great when I'm playing, okay? All right, last but not least, sitting up straight. So a lot of us are often curled over phones and laptops, so this is really common, but we want to make sure we sit up straight. Reason being, then our elbows are free to move. So as we're playing and we're moving all over the keyboard as we get more advanced, if you're sitting too close, if you're hunching, your elbow's going to hit your rib cage. It's a little inconvenient. So just make sure you sit up straight so you can move freely, okay? Awesome. So let's go on to the next thing. So strong fingers. So if you're more advanced, I will build in more advanced ideas for you as we go. But if you're beginning, this is really important, and it's important for everybody, no matter their level, is we want strong fingers, and we want all of our fingers to have equal strength, ideally, which is not always the case when we're starting out. So if you're beginning, we're looking at the Alfred book, the red one, this one. I think a lot of people are using that. And it's also up on the screen as well. So what you can do is take 2 fingers like bunny ears and put them on 2 black keys and walk them back and forth. And what you want to make sure is as you're doing that is that you're raising your fingers a lot. So we call that high action. And what that does is that works up flexibility, but it also works up strength. Okay, so back and forth. You want to make sure you do that on both hands. I'm right-handed, so my right hand always feels much stronger. My left hand feels weaker. So make sure you do that on both hands to build up that strength. You can then move to groups of 3, okay? So if you have groups of 3, it's the same thing, really high action, okay? Raising your fingers really high. If you're at your piano, which I hope you are, you can certainly do this alongside me. Both hands. Okay, and I'll quickly play these for you as well if you're starting out and you haven't had a chance to hear them or you've played them. So the first one on the left is called Right and Left. Okay, and then we have Left and Right, which works on groups of 3. I'm still rubbing my hands to warm them up. Okay, so that's what I would do. And if you're also a beginner, there's a couple things that you want to make sure you know. So finger numbers is a big thing. A lot of you may already know this, but it's good to go over it. So our thumbs are 1, pointers are 2, middle fingers 3, ring fingers are 4, pinky is 5. And then if you're still figuring out which is left hand and which is right hand, the way I remember it is your left hand, when you look at it, makes a capital L for left or for Leslie, which is how I learned it when I was a kid. And then your right hand makes a backwards L, so that can't possibly be your left hand, right? So that's how I remember that. So those are basic things to get started when you're just beginning. You can also find all the groups of 3 on your piano. You can find all the groups of 2. But let's go on to slightly more advanced ideas then. So we talked about strong fingers. Now we need to talk about independent fingers. So you'll notice that if I try to move my ring finger, my pinky wobbles along with it, right? And this is because we have tendons that kind of split off, and the same tendon splits off and goes into those fingers. So ideally, our fingers, piano players all of our fingers are independent and can move on their own. So that's what we're trying to work for. So one really good way to do this, and if you're a beginner, I'll give you a workaround also. If you're playing on white keys, if you're advanced enough to do that, try pushing down 5 keys all at once. So you should be able to see this on the camera. I'm 1 white key per finger. I'm pushing them all down at once. Bonus points if you can do it without making any noise. And what you're going to do is, while you're keeping all your fingers down, you're going to raise your thumb and then play with your thumb. Just up and down, up and down. And you'll notice I'm doing that while all my other fingers are holding keys down. If you're just starting out and you're still playing on black keys, you can do it with black keys too. Try it with just a group of 2 first. Bonus points if you can do it without making a sound, like that. And then just keep 1 down and walk the other up and down. And then the other. Okay? So if you're playing on black keys, you can do that. If you're playing on white keys, let's start with your thumb. Go to your pointer. And then your 3rd finger. And your 4th finger. And then your pinky. So you might have noticed as you're doing that, it gets progressively harder as you go out from your thumb. That's because these fingers are a little weaker. So those are the ones we want to target. I'm guessing most of you did that with the hand you write with first. So let's switch hands and do it with the hand we don't write with, which is harder. I'm starting on a C, C, D, F, G if you want to play the same thing I am. So take your left hand and do the same thing. Push down all 5 keys. Bonus points if you can do it quietly. And then do your thumb while holding all the other keys down silently. And then your pointer. Good. And as you're doing this, it's stressful. So you might notice your shoulder up near your ears. Just kind of relax. What were we on? Middle finger? Ring finger. See how that one's harder? And then pinky. Good. And younger kids, if you're still playing on black keys, if you haven't done that, you can do that with a group of 3. Push all 3 down and try to do that with all 3 fingers. If that feels really hard and you're sort of like, I'm not sure how to coordinate this, if mom or dad are nearby, or older brother or sister, have them do it, and you can put your hand on top of theirs and feel how that feels. Or you can put your hand under theirs and they can kind of guide you. That can often be really useful. So this is important in all piano, but these pieces, which are still in the Alfred level 1A, kind of showcase why it's important. So if we look at the first one, playing in a new position, you'll notice you hear how it got quieter at the top. That's because weaker fingers aren't working quite as hard. So our goal is to make sure that it sounds equally strong and loud all the way through by making sure our weak fingers are stronger. Okay. It's the same thing with position C on the facing page. Make sure that your pinkies are just as strong as these fingers here, okay? So that's something good that you can work on. So far we've had strengthening your fingers by walking back and forth on black keys, and then independent fingers by holding down keys and just working one finger at a time, either on white keys or on black keys, okay? Awesome. If you have any questions, just drop them into the chat too as we go. So next critically important thing for piano playing is coordinating your fingers. So if any students are working in their ABRSM book, which is the exam book, the minuet and C is from that book, but you can also see it on the screen. And the sick doll is from Play It Again Book 1, which is a book I use when adults are returning after they haven't played for a while. So both of these kind of outline a really important part of piano playing, which is when you have to play multiple notes at the same time. And so we need to coordinate that. What often happens before you practice that a lot is that the keys will go down not at the same time, and you'll get kind of a gadunk sound, which can be a little distracting and not quite what we're aiming for. So one way to practice this is, if you look to the left of your screen, practice putting down, if you start on C, practice putting down in your right hand 1 and 3 at the same time. And make sure you get them down simultaneously. Okay? And then you do 2 and 4. And then you do 5 and 3, which is a little harder. 4 and 2, 3 and 1. And then you repeat. Okay? So your goal is to make sure all of those sound really smooth and we don't have any gadunk, gadunk, gadunk sort of going on. So that's pretty easy with our dominant hand, right? It's a little harder, like always, with the hand we don't write with. So if we start with our pinkies on C, we can do the same thing in our left hand. So 1 and 3, 2 and 4, 3 and 5, 2 and 4, 1 and 3, and then back and forth. Like so. Bonus points if you can do both hands at the same time. Okay. Now, if that feels a little inaccessible at the moment, there are ways that you can step up to that. So a good way to do that is to keep your thumb always stationary. So for instance, start on C with your thumb in your right hand, put down your thumb and your second finger. Sounds a little crunchy, but we'll work with it. And then do that a couple times. Cool, that feels good. Put down 1 and 3 and do that a couple times. Then 1 and 4. And then 1 and 5. Okay, and you can also walk that up and down. And you can do that in both hands. Okay, so there's options there. Now, this is important in these pieces in particular. If you look at the second line of minuet and C, you'll notice there's a whole bunch of notes that are all together in the right hand. Right there, we have 3 notes at once. So can you imagine if we were kind of, it starts to sound a little busy and not quite what we're aiming for. The clarity isn't there. So that's why it's important to be able to get those notes down simultaneously, and that's why this exercise is really useful. If you look at something like the sick doll, which is the other one, you'll notice there's a lot in the left hand at the beginning that's supposed to be happening at the same time. And again, the same thing. If they're not going down simultaneously, they'll sound really different. So this one, so can you imagine if we weren't quite coordinating all those, it would sound really different. So there's a lot of this in piano music. So that's why I recommend this so much. And again, it's a little bit harder with those weaker fingers on the outsides of your hands. So that's why this is important. Awesome. So let's go on to relaxed wrists. So relaxed wrist is something that you start to work on as you get to more advanced pieces, as you start wanting to use dynamics a little bit more. Dynamics are as you get softer, as you get louder. If you want to change the style and the tone a little bit more, make something softer, create some kind of shape. So the way that you practice relaxed wrists is strike a key down, let's say a C, and move your wrist up and down first. And you can even do that when you're not playing. So you kind of want this motion. You kind of want a loose sort of, not floppy, but at least a relaxed wrist. I play a lot of flute, so I tend to like stay like this with, you know, kind of rigid wrists. So this is good for me too, to kind of remember like, oh yes, my wrists can move and they should. So let's play a C and just practice moving your wrist up and down. So you can see that flexion right there, okay? And then try going down, feeling the weight of your arm, pull your hand down, and then rolling up and off. And seeing if you can kind of end a note nicely that way. Great, and you can do that on all fingers. So now I'm using my second finger. And you can do it in both hands. And again, if you're righty, your left hand might not feel quite as coordinated and vice versa. Now, why is this important? This is important if we're working on a piece like this. Because if we play with rigid wrists, it sounds a little mechanical to me. And so if we play with more relaxed wrists, it'll sound softer and it'll have more shape. And before we do that, I'm also going to talk about the pedal, and I'm going to take off my big squishy polar bear slipper, which squeaks when I play with the pedal. So if you're sitting at your piano, I'm talking about the pedal all the way over on the right, which sustains, right, when you push it down. So that's pretty cool. It creates this really atmospheric sound. The challenge is making sure that you push the pedal down and take it up at the right moments. And so ideally, we want to do that before we create unpleasant noises. So if you pick, if you find a C and B on your piano, or any white keys that are right next to each other with no black keys in between, if you find one of those, C and B for instance, push them down at the same time, it sounds super spicy, right? That's because they're so close together. And so if you were to play a C and then a B without lifting the pedal up, you get that spiciness there, which doesn't sound great. So a great way to practice pedal is to practice playing some C's with the pedal down. And then as you switch to B, lift your foot up really quickly and then depress it again. Okay, so you're lifting your foot up between the two. And so ideally we're avoiding any of that sound, okay? Now, when you use the pedal, you want to pivot from your ankle, or sorry, from your heel. You want to keep your heel on the ground, and you're just sort of moving your foot up and down on the pedal like so, okay? So I'm going to add pedal into this, and I'm going to play with relaxed wrists. And again, here's how it sounds without those things. Okay, and now I'm going to add pedal and try to do a little bit of this. So you see, I'm sorry, I just played a wrong note, but you see with the relaxed wrists like that and with the pedal, it kind of creates this different atmosphere. It makes it a little bit softer and makes it a little bit more musical. Okay? Awesome. Again, if you have any questions, just drop them off in the chat box for me. So the last things I'm going to talk about today are, we're getting increasingly more advanced. And so we're going to look at this Clementi sonatina. which has a lot going on. So if you look at the music, you'll see a lot of notes happening at the same time, which are the coordinated fingers we talked about, you know, pushing down multiple notes at the same time. And then we're also going to talk about putting our thumb underneath and flat and curved finger exercises. So if we're looking at the music and you have it in front of you, if you look at measure 8, which is in the second line, there's a lot going on with our hand needing to stretch out. And if you look at the camera, looking down at my hand, you'll be able to see this. Like so. And then it needs to shift suddenly from this to this, this to this, okay? The reason for that is sometimes we need to stretch out to get things that are far away. But then we need to come back together to play notes close together and to play fast, because this is usually more helpful when we're curved to play quickly. So one of the things you can do is if you put your palms together like so, spread your fingers out and practice doing this. Bring them together as you go. So, and you can do it nice and silly. It's also sort of a nice stretch. But that builds strength and that kind of gets your hands accustomed to that feeling, okay? So if you're a more advanced player and you want to try this at measure 8, you're gonna keep your hands spread out and then pull it together when you run up those 16th notes. And if this is something that looks pretty advanced, just stay excited about getting to do it someday. So one thing that's helpful when you do something like that is making sure your wrist stays alive and active, because if you drop your wrist and then you try to transition to curvy fingers, it's really hard. So you'll notice you want to keep your wrist up, your elbow active. Okay, so that's one thing you can work on, is this one here, okay? Now the other thing that we're going to talk about is you're putting your thumb under. So you are probably aware you only have 5 fingers, and there's 88 keys on a piano if you have a full one. So we rely a lot on our thumbs to help us twist our fingers and our hands around to play all of the keys. So if you watch, putting my thumb under, etc. Okay? That's always putting the thumb under. So one of the ways we can practice this is that motion. So if we start on C, and these are the thumb under exercises, and we play 1, 2, 3, and then put your thumb under, and then come back. C, D, E, F, E, D, C, and you're playing the F with your thumb underneath. Okay? Always do it with your other hand, starting on C also if you want. So places where this is important, for instance, if you look at measure 15, a couple notes right before 15, you'll notice the right hand. If you look at the overhead camera, you'll see how much my thumb is twisting around to get me where I need to go. Okay, so that's why that is important. That happens all the time in piano music. So that's pretty much what I was going to talk about today. So to sum up, we had stretches and massage to get you started, sitting up straight, making sure you're not about to hit your rib cage with your elbows when you're playing. We talked about finger strength on black keys if you're just starting out, so playing on groups of 2, practicing back and forth, groups of 3, practicing all those groups of 3. And then we talked about strength. So if you're still playing on black keys, putting down groups of 2 and then playing one at a time while the other finger is depressing. You can also do that in groups of 3. And if you're playing on white keys, putting down all 5 white keys silently if you can, and then practicing one finger at a time. Okay, so that was strength. Independence, we talked about that was independence. And then we talked about coordination, which is putting down multiple keys at the same time, hopefully simultaneously. Okay. And last but not least, we talked about sorry, two more things. Wrist flexibility and pedal. So striking a key and practicing using that wrist to roll up and off the key gracefully. Using the pedal, making sure you pivot from your heel and go up and down, and exercises to tackle that. And then I believe last but not least, we talked about flexible, fast hands, right? So talked about this exercise here, all right? And then we talked about the thumb under exercises where you practice twisting your thumb under and back so you can kind of build up that speed. So if you have the Alfred books or the ABRSM books, you can apply all of that to those. We talked about them here. If you're in other books like Faber or you know, you're more advanced and you're working on Bach two-part inventions or something, all of these exercises apply. And if you start looking for these scenarios, I'm sure you'll find them everywhere, as I have. So that's everything for today. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen with you and make sure you guys don't have any questions. Just open up the chat. No questions. If you want to type something or say something and ask me a question, you certainly can. And if not, I'll sign off and call it a day. I'll give you about 10 seconds to write something if you want to.
Phil here, I just unmuted. I just want to thank you for a great class. That was awesome.
It's my pleasure.
And everybody, if you'd like to watch this again, I'll have it posted to our school's YouTube channel by the end of the evening today.
Awesome. Okay, if there's no questions, we'll call it a day. So keep playing music and having a wonderful time with it. And if you stay with me, I'll see you on Thursday. And if not, we'll see you on Zoom at some point over the next week. Okay, everybody, thanks for coming. Bye.